In the quiet mountains of Montana, a former Marine returned home with nothing left but the weight of memories he wished he could forget. He came here to escape, to disappear, to survive the silence. But on one ordinary morning in a crowded little market, he saw something that stopped him cold. A starving German shepherd, shaking in fear, being beaten because no one wanted him. When he stepped forward to save that terrified dog, he had no idea he was saving himself too. What they didn't know was that danger would soon follow them home, and that this useless dog would one day stand between life and death to protect the only man who ever showed him kindness. This is not just a story about rescue. It's a story about God's timing, second chances, and the miracle that happens when two wounded souls find each other in a world that tried to break them. If this story touches your heart, please subscribe, leave a comment, and share it with someone who needs a little hope today. Thank you so much for watching. May God bless you and your family. Late summer in western Montana was a season that tricked the senses. The sun rose warm over the mountains, yet the air still carried a cold bite sliding down from the Rockies. Pine trees swayed in the restless wind, their sharp scent mixing with the dust that the breeze kicked up from old gravel paths. Clearwater Ridge, a town with barely 500 residents, seemed to stand still in time. Weather-beaten storefronts, creaking wooden signs, and roads scarred by years of frost. Ethan Walker, 35, stepped out of his faded green pickup as the wind tugged at his jacket. He carried the presence of a man shaped by hard years. Tall, wiry muscular, shoulders naturally squared from endless drills, and movements precise even when exhausted. His face was rugged. High cheekbones, a strong angular jaw darkened by unshaven stubble, and faint scars tracing across his brow. His gray-blue eyes scanned the tree line with the controlled alertness of someone who had spent too long in danger to ever fully relax. Ethan had just been discharged from the Marine Corps after more than a decade of service. Combat deployments had left invisible fractures inside him, sleepless nights, sudden flashes of memory, a wary distance from crowds and noise. He wasn't unfriendly. He simply no longer knew how to exist comfortably around people. Returning to Montana felt like stepping into a quieter world where his ghosts might finally stop whispering. The cabin before him once belonged to his grandfather, Henry Walker. Henry had been a tall, broad-shouldered rancher with hands roughened by decades of cattle work and a voice that always carried calm authority. Ethan remembered summers spent here as a boy, learning how to mend fences and chop firewood under Henry's patient guidance. After Henry died, the cabin had been left untouched, slowly surrendering to time. Now Ethan had come back to reclaim it, not as a home filled with warmth, but as the last place he could try to rebuild himself. He lifted his duffel bag from the truck bed, the muscles in his arm tensing under the weight. The porch boards groaned as he stepped onto them, announcing the presence of someone who had been gone far too long. Spiderwebs clung to the corners, and the wooden railing leaned precariously outward. Inside, dust floated through the beams of sunlight that filtered in through cracked windows. The air smelled of dry timber, old memories, and abandonment. Ethan moved room to room, his boots echoing softly on the wooden floor. The kitchen cabinets hung crookedly, one barely attached by a rusted hinge. He paused at the fireplace, running his fingers across the stone his grandfather once laid by hand. For a brief moment, the warmth of old childhood memories pushed against the cold tension always coiled in his chest. But the feeling passed quickly, replaced by a familiar emptiness. He inhaled slowly, grounding himself the way military therapists had taught him. The yard outside was wild and overgrown. Tall grass swayed like waves, and brambles had crept up around the old fence line. The chicken coop had collapsed inward, and the vegetable patch was buried beneath weeds. This place needed more than work. It needed resurrection. Ethan grabbed an old shovel from the shed, its wooden handle splintered but still usable. He started clearing dead grass around the cabin, each swing of the shovel sending up small clouds of dust. Sweat rolled down his neck despite the cool wind, but the physical effort steadied his restless thoughts. Manual labor felt safe, predictable, honest, controllable. Hours passed as he cut back brush, gathered broken fence pieces, and pulled up stubborn roots. By midday, the sky deepened into a sharp blue, and birds circled lazily above the treetops. Ethan wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, breathing heavily but steady. The land was challenging, but for the first time in months, he felt something other than numbness. Purpose. Later, he moved to the barn area to inspect the old lumber stored there. The barn door moaned loudly when he pushed it open, revealing stacked planks covered in dust and mouse tracks. He selected a few workable boards, testing their weight and strength before carrying them toward the broken fence. His movements were efficient, almost meditative. While working, Ethan noticed a figure approaching on the distant path, a neighbor from town. It was Tom Hargreaves, a man in his late 50s with a stocky build, sunburned skin, and a permanent squint, as if the Montana sun had carved itself into his expression. Tom was friendly but straightforward, known for his dry humor and no-nonsense personality shaped by years of running the local hardware store. He lifted a hand in greeting as he walked closer. "Didn't think I'd see a walker back here," Tom called out, his voice roughened by decades of cigarette smoke. Ethan nodded politely, though his shoulders tightened slightly at the unexpected company. Tom noticed. He was perceptive in the quiet way older countrymen often were, but didn't push. Instead, he looked around the property, whistling low at the level of disrepair. "You'll have your hands full," Tom said, not unkindly. Ethan gave a short, acknowledging smile. "It's work I need." Tom seemed to understand more than Ethan expected. He simply patted the younger man's shoulder and said, "If you need supplies, you know where my store is." When Tom left, silence returned, broken only by the whir of the wind. Ethan resumed repairing the fence, hammering nails with steady force. The rhythm anchored him, each strike a reminder that this land could be rebuilt just like a broken life. He planned the next tasks, fixing the chicken coop, clearing the vegetable patch, reinforcing the barn walls. As evening settled, the mountains turned purple under the sinking sun. Ethan stood in the yard, breathing in the crisp air as a faint chill slipped across his skin. The cabin behind him looked worn but slightly less lonely now that he had touched its walls again. He imagined what it could become, a place of quiet routine, self-sustained living, and maybe even healing. Yet deep down, he knew he was still drifting, still searching for a lifeline he couldn't name. The cabin was a beginning, nothing more. He didn't know that fate was already moving toward him from the town below, on four legs, bruised, frightened, and waiting for someone to save it. For now, he simply looked out into the forest and whispered to himself that he would try again tomorrow. The next morning arrived colder than expected, a gray veil of clouds stretching over Clearwater Ridge as if the sky itself sensed something was about to shift. Ethan loaded a few crates of vegetables, carrots, potatoes, and the early batch of cabbage into the back of his pickup. The harvest was small, rough, and uneven, but it was a start. He needed nails, salt, oil for the generator, and a few basic tools, so the trip to town couldn't wait. Driving down the winding gravel road, Ethan kept one hand steady on the wheel while the other tapped lightly on his thigh, a habit he developed during long convoys overseas where silence felt heavier than danger. The closer he got to town, the more life returned to the landscape. Smoke rising from chimneys, the faint hum of early traffic, and the chatter of locals setting up their small market stalls. The Clearwater Ridge marketplace was modest but lively. Wooden tables lined the plaza, each run by residents with weathered hands and open smiles. Among them was Martha Ross, a woman in her early 60s with soft silver hair tied into a low bun and gentle lines around her eyes from a lifetime of smiling at customers. Her posture was slightly hunched from years of lifting produce, but she carried a warmth that made people linger. Martha had a nurturing spirit shaped by raising 5 children alone after her husband died in a logging accident decades earlier. She waved at Ethan the moment she saw him. He gave her a polite nod as he unloaded his vegetables, and while Martha asked friendly questions, he answered briefly but respectfully, his quiet nature already familiar to her from past summers when he visited as a child. A distant commotion broke the calm of the market. Harsh shouting, metal scraping against concrete, and a sharp yelp tore through the morning air. Ethan's head snapped toward the noise, instinct kicking in before thought. Near the edge of the plaza stood a makeshift pen surrounded by old metal fencing. A man towered over it, yelling curses as he swung a worn leather belt downward. Inside the pen, a German shepherd cowered. Ethan's steps quickened without him realizing it. The man wielding the belt was Rick Dobson, a gaunt, rough-edged figure in his mid-40s. His skin was leathery and sunburned, his beard patchy and unkempt, and his eyes carried a mean, restless energy. Years of debt, drinking, and failed business attempts had carved bitterness into his personality. Rick was known around town for short tempers and shady dealings, especially involving animals he bought cheaply and tried to resell for profit. Today's frustration had clearly turned cruel. The dog beneath him was heartbreakingly thin, ribs visible through matted fur. Its ears drooped flat, its tail curled tight under its belly. Its coat, though naturally black and tan, looked faded and unkempt. It appeared young, maybe 1 or 2 years old, but its posture carried the exhaustion of an animal that had learned fear too early. Rick raised his belt again and shouted, "Useless mutt! Nobody wants you! You hear me?" Before the belt fell, Ethan's hand closed around Rick's wrist with sharp precision. "Enough," Ethan said, his voice low but edged with steel. Rick yanked back, startled. "Hey! What the hell do you think you're doing?" Martha watched from her stall, worry tightening her expression, but she didn't step in. Locals knew Rick could escalate things quickly. Ethan stood straighter, his presence suddenly more imposing. "Stop hitting the dog." Rick scoffed, pulling his wrist free. "It's my dog. I can do whatever I want. Thing won't fetch, won't guard, won't listen. Waste of money." The dog whimpered softly, shrinking farther into the corner of the pen. Ethan's patience thinned. "How much?" Rick blinked. "What? How much to buy him?" Rick's eyes narrowed, calculating. "You want this one? Buddy, I'm warning you, he's broken, won't ever trust anyone." Ethan didn't look at Rick. His gaze was locked on the trembling dog. "How much?" Rick huffed, then named a price higher than the dog was worth. Ethan didn't argue. He handed over the bills with steady hands. Rick shoved the money into his pocket, grinning with missing teeth. "Your funeral, Marine." That thing's damaged goods. Ethan ignored him entirely as he unlatched the pen. The dog flinched at the sound of the metal hinge, backing up until its rump hit the corner. Ethan crouched slowly, a careful, deliberate motion, and extended an open palm. "Come on, boy," he murmured, voice gentle in a way he rarely used with people. The dog's body trembled. It hesitated, whining softly, its amber eyes filled with confusion rather than recognition. But Ethan stayed patient, lowering his hand further, softening his breathing. After a long moment, the dog took a single step forward, then another. Finally, its nose touched Ethan's fingers, cold and hesitant. "It's okay," Ethan whispered. "You're safe now." Ethan lifted the dog carefully, feeling how light it was. The bones beneath the fur pressed painfully against his arms. He carried the German shepherd to his truck, while townspeople glanced curiously, but didn't interfere. They knew Ethan wasn't the type to act impulsively, unless something was truly wrong. Martha approached as he secured the dog gently in the passenger seat. "He'll need food, warmth, and patience," she said softly. Ethan gave a faint nod. "I can do that." Martha laid a hand briefly on his arm. "Your grandfather would have liked what you did today." Driving back toward the forest, Ethan glanced at the dog curled tightly against the seat. Its breathing was shallow, its eyes tracking every movement fearfully. The world had not been kind to it, just as the world had not been kind to Ethan. When they reached the cabin, the dog refused to exit the truck at first. Ethan didn't force it. He sat on the edge of the seat, silent, letting time do the work. Eventually, the dog climbed down, legs shaking slightly. Inside the cabin, it immediately fled to a corner, pressing itself between the wall and an old crate. It would take days, maybe weeks, to build trust. But Ethan had already decided on a name. "Shadow," he whispered. "If you stay with me, that'll be your name." Shadow didn't move, but its ears twitched at the sound of Ethan's voice. A small reaction, but enough. Both man and dog, two broken souls, had taken the first step toward each other. Shadow's first night at the cabin passed in a fragile, uneasy quiet. The forest outside whispered with wind brushing over pine branches, but inside, the air felt heavy with caution. Ethan slept lightly on the worn couch, one ear attuned to every sound, while Shadow curled in the farthest corner of the room, body pressed tightly against the wall as if trying to disappear into it. Morning arrived with pale sunlight spilling across the floorboards, and Ethan rose slowly, careful not to startle the trembling figure in the corner. The German shepherd lifted its head just enough to track his movements, its amber eyes wide and fearful, but it didn't growl. It simply watched, waiting for the world to hurt it again. Ethan prepared a small bowl of soft food and set it on the ground several meters away from Shadow. Instead of approaching, he stepped back and sat on the edge of a chair, deliberately turning his body slightly sideways to appear less imposing. Shadow didn't move for nearly 5 minutes. Its thin legs shook when it finally stood, creeping toward the bowl with hesitant, jerky motions. Every small noise, a floorboard creak, the flutter of a bird outside, made it freeze. Ethan stayed still, controlling even his breathing, letting the dog eat at its own fragile pace. When Shadow finally finished, it retreated to its corner again, head lowered, tail tucked. Later, Ethan headed outside to repair the old dog shed behind the cabin. The structure had rotted in several places, but its frame was sturdy. He replaced broken boards, swept out old nests left by field mice, and laid down fresh straw. Physical work always steadied him, but today there was a different purpose in every hammer strike. He glanced toward the cabin window once and caught a glimpse of Shadow staring out, posture low but eyes curious. It was a small sign, but a sign nonetheless. By midday, the sun broke through the gray, bringing a brief warmth to the clearing. Ethan brought Shadow outside using only gentle words and an open stance. The dog hesitated at the doorway, claws scraping the wood as though something invisible held it back. Finally, it stepped out, nose lowered to the ground, sniffing cautiously at grass and air. It stuck close to the wall of the cabin, but it was progress. Ethan sat on the steps with a cup of lukewarm coffee, watching without approaching. He had learned patience in the Marines. Sometimes all you could do was wait and give space. While Shadow explored, a truck rumbled toward the property. Ethan tensed instinctively, scanning for potential threat until he recognized the battered blue Ford belonging to Dr. Lena Brooks, the local veterinarian. Lena was in her early 40s with shoulder-length auburn hair usually tied in a loose ponytail, freckles across sun-touched skin, and gentle hazel eyes that always reflected concern before judgment. Her build was slim but sturdy, shaped by years of lifting crates, farm animals, and medical equipment. She had a calm confidence about her, the kind that came from witnessing both the cruelty and compassion humans were capable of. Losing her younger brother in a wildfire years ago had shaped her into someone who dedicated her life to protecting living creatures, the only legacy she felt she could honor. Lena stepped out of the truck holding a small kit. "Martha told me you brought home a shepherd in rough shape," she said softly as she approached. Ethan's posture stiffened out of habit, not hostility. "He's skittish," Ethan replied. "Don't want to scare him more than he already is." Lena nodded, scanning the area with practiced eyes before spotting Shadow near the cabin wall. Her expression softened. "Poor boy. He's been through it." She didn't walk toward Shadow directly. Instead, she lowered herself to the ground several meters away, placing her medical kit beside her and letting the dog observe. Her gentle posture made Ethan ease just a little. They spoke quietly, mostly Lena explaining trauma behaviors, Ethan asking simple but earnest questions about how to help. For someone who rarely talked much, he spoke more now than he expected to. Lena eventually left without examining Shadow up close, promising to come back only when Ethan felt the dog was ready. That evening, Ethan carried a blanket and gently placed it in the repaired dog shed, leaving the door open so Shadow wouldn't feel trapped. He made a small trail of food leading to it, each piece spaced far enough apart that Shadow would have to take small steps. At first, the dog refused to move. But as dusk settled and crickets began their steady chorus, hunger overcame fear. Shadow edged forward, nose twitching, following the path until it reached the entrance of the shed. Ethan stayed several feet behind, heart quietly hopeful. The dog stepped inside hesitantly, sniffed the straw, then laid down as if testing the new space. It didn't stay long, only a few minutes. But it stayed. Night came cold and still. Ethan left a dim lantern burning near Shadow's corner inside the cabin so darkness wouldn't swallow the dog's nerves. The faint glow softened the room, and something about it seemed to calm both of them. When Ethan lay down, Shadow didn't hide as far into the corner as before. It stayed several inches closer. Those inches felt like miles. The next morning brought a moment Ethan hadn't dared expect so soon. When he awoke and sat up, Shadow inched forward. Not much, just a step, and its tail moved once, a small, uncertain wag. Ethan froze, afraid the moment would disappear if he breathed too loudly. Shadow's tail flicked again. For the first time, the dog's eyes didn't reflect sheer fear. They reflected possibility. Healing had begun. The night settled early over the Montana woods. The sky washed in deep indigo as the temperature dropped faster than usual. A thin layer of frost formed along the fence rails, and the wind threaded through the pines with a cold, uneasy whistle. Inside the cabin, Ethan sat at the small kitchen table sanding a piece of wood for a repair project, while Shadow rested nearby, curled but alert, ears flicking at every distant sound. Their days had begun to fall into a soft rhythm, quiet, gentle, slow steps toward trust. But tonight, something in the air felt different. Shadow's head snapped up before Ethan even noticed anything. The shepherd stood, muscles tense beneath his slowly improving coat, and released a low growl. Ethan paused, listening. The forest outside seemed too still, too watchful. Then Shadow barked, sharp, loud, insistent, and bolted toward the front door. Ethan rose immediately, instincts flaring to life like old embers reigniting. He grabbed his flashlight and stepped outside, the cold biting into his skin as Shadow charged ahead, teeth bared. The beam of light cut through the dark and landed on a figure standing near the edge of the yard. Rick Dobson. His appearance was sharper now under the harsh glow. A thin, angular face with a tangled beard, cheeks sunken from stress, and eyes jittering with barely restrained anger. His clothes hung awkwardly on his wiry frame, a stained jacket, ripped jeans, and mud-caked boots. Rick carried himself with the desperate swagger of a man who felt the world owed him something and was ready to take it by force. In one hand, he gripped a rusted hunting knife. In the other, he held a piece of rope, clearly planning to restrain Shadow. "I'm taking back what's mine," Rick spat, his voice shaking with bitterness. "You bought him under false terms. That mutt's worth 10 times what you gave me. I'm not leaving without him." Shadow stepped in front of Ethan, posture rigid and fearless in a way Ethan had never seen before. The shepherd's hackles rose, tail stiff, a deep protective snarl rumbling from his chest. It was no longer the sound of a scared, broken animal. It was the sound of loyalty awakening. Ethan kept his voice steady. "You're trespassing. Leave now." Rick sneered. "Cut the hero act, Marine. You think you're the only one who's had it rough? That dog was supposed to make me money. I need him back." His fingers tightened on the knife. The blade trembled in the cold. Shadow barked furiously, stepping closer to Rick, forcing him back a pace. For the first time since Ethan met him, fear was nowhere in the dog's eyes, only fierce certainty. Rick's irritation spiked. "Call him off! I swear I'll gut that dog before you get near me!" Ethan's gaze hardened. Something inside him shifted, an old discipline rising to the surface. He spoke calmly, but with command. "Put the knife down." Rick lunged. It happened fast, but Ethan was faster. Military reflexes that had dulled but never died snapped into action. He sidestepped the wild swing, caught Rick's wrist, twisted sharply, and forced the knife to the ground. Rick yelped, stumbling as Ethan swept his legs from beneath him with one decisive motion. Rick hit the frozen dirt with a thud. Ethan pinned him with a knee between the shoulder blades, holding him down effortlessly while Shadow stationed himself beside them, barking in short, warning bursts. The rope dropped from Rick's hand. "Get off me!" Rick sputtered. "You can't do this! I'll tell the sheriff you attacked me!" Ethan reached for his phone with his free hand. "Good. I'll let him know you came armed, trespassing, and threatening animals again." Rick froze. His silence said everything. Everyone in town knew Rick had a reputation, one the law had been watching closely. Minutes later, the flashing lights of a sheriff's vehicle crested the dirt road. Sheriff Dale Rowan stepped out. A tall man in his early 50s with a salt and pepper mustache, broad shoulders, and a calm, no-drama demeanor shaped by decades, keeping peace in a small town where tempers flared often but rarely with weapons. Dale's eyes took in the scene. Rick pinned, knife nearby, Shadow growling protectively, and his face tightened with disappointment. "Rick," Dale sighed, "I warned you last month when we caught you starving those dogs. You're done." Rick screamed protests as the sheriff cuffed him, but it didn't matter. The evidence gleamed in the flashlight beam. When the patrol car drove away, the yard fell silent again, leaving only the wind and the steady sound of Shadow's breathing. Ethan turned toward his dog. Shadow looked up at him, ears relaxed now, tail giving a small, relieved wag. For the first time, Ethan knelt and reached out a hand without fear of startling him. Shadow stepped forward on his own. That simple motion, voluntary, trusting, pure, cut deeper than any blow Ethan had taken in war. Peace had been torn apart that night, but what rose from the wreckage was something stronger. A bond sealed not by fear, but by choice. Autumn settled fully over Clearwater Ridge in the weeks that followed Rick's arrest. The forest shifted from deep green to amber, gold, and muted red. Crisp mornings rolled into sunlit afternoons, each day carrying the quiet promise of renewal. On Ethan's land, the transformation was even more profound. The old cabin, once silent and worn, now felt alive, breathing, expanding, reshaping itself into something more than a memory. It had become a home again. Shadow changed first. The once frail German shepherd developed muscle along his legs and shoulders as he explored the property with new confidence. His coat, once dull and matted, grew shinier, thickening with health and warmth. Each morning, he bounded into the yard with excitement, chasing the falling leaves or sniffing along the new fence line Ethan built. His tail wagged freely now, no longer weighed down by fear. He barked not in terror, but in greeting, not in alarm, but in joy. The land echoed with his life. Ethan, too, shifted in ways he hadn't predicted. Nights that were once fractured by nightmares became calmer. Shadow often slept a few feet from the couch or the bed, his steady breathing a soft anchor in the darkness. Ethan found himself sleeping longer, waking without the familiar sting of anxiety. Meals became routine again, simple breakfasts of eggs and toast, lunches of roasted vegetables from his own soil. He no longer forgot to eat. Shadow begged for food like a patient child, and Ethan learned to feed them both. The cabin filled with small sounds that had been missing for years. The padding of paws across old floorboards, the thump of a heavy tail against wood, the occasional, playful growl when Shadow demanded attention. Sometimes Ethan spoke aloud just to fill the space. Observations about the weather, questions Shadow couldn't answer, or small jokes that earned a tilt of the dog's head. He never felt foolish doing it. The silence was no longer a burden. It was shared. The farm continued to grow. Ethan rebuilt the chicken coop with fresh lumber, installed a new roof on the barn, and planted late-season crops. Several neighbors stopped by occasionally. Martha dropping off homemade jam, Dr. Lena Brooks checking on Shadow's progress, or Tom bringing extra nails when Ethan ran out. Lena in particular visited more often, always gentle and sincere, admiring the bond forming between man and dog. She'd crouch beside Shadow, offering treats or softly rubbing behind his ears, her hazel eyes glowing with pride at how far he had come. Though she never said it directly, Ethan sensed she felt healing here as well. One afternoon, as the sun dipped lower, painting the yard in honey-colored light, Ethan paused from chopping firewood to watch Shadow sprint across the clearing. The dog carried a large stick, prancing with exaggerated pride, before dropping it at Ethan's feet. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You want me to throw it?" Shadow barked once. Sharp, affirmative. Ethan threw the stick toward the tree line, and Shadow raced after it, tail swirling like a flag in the wind. When he returned, he pressed his head gently against Ethan's leg, a gesture not of need, but of affection. Moments like that accumulated, weaving themselves into the fabric of Ethan's days until he realized he had begun smiling without noticing. His shoulders sat lower. His breath came easier. The world felt less like a battlefield and more like a wide-open field of possibility. Late one evening, after finishing chores, Ethan stepped out to the porch. The sunset stretched across the valley in a warm, fiery glow. Shadow trotted beside him, sitting close enough that their shoulders brushed. Together they looked over the small farm, the repaired fence glowing softly in the light, the cabin windows reflecting orange hues, the distant mountains wearing shadows like blankets. Ethan exhaled deeply. It wasn't the kind of breath that carried exhaustion or dread. It was something softer, something whole. "I thought I rescued you," he murmured, his voice touched with quiet awe. "But maybe you were sent here to rescue me." Shadow leaned against him, tail slowly sweeping the wooden boards behind them. Ethan rested a hand on the dog's back, feeling the steady rise and fall of Shadow's chest. Two wounded souls had found each other in a broken world, and somehow, in the quiet simplicity of rebuilding a life, they had filled the empty spaces within one another. As the last strands of daylight faded and the cool evening breeze brushed past them, Ethan and Shadow stood side by side, man and dog, survivor and survivor, framed perfectly in the golden glow. It was an image of peace restored, hearts mended, and a future no longer haunted by the past. It was the ending Ethan never knew he needed. Sometimes, God doesn't send us miracles wrapped in light. Sometimes, He sends them quietly, on four trembling legs with a wounded heart, waiting for someone to believe in them again. Shadow wasn't just a dog who needed saving. He was a reminder that even in our darkest seasons, God places the right souls in our path, souls meant to pull us back into the light. And Ethan wasn't just a veteran searching for peace. He was a man chosen to heal and to be healed. Life often gives us storms we don't ask for. Loneliness, fear, heartbreak, or the weight of memories we wish we could forget. But just like Ethan and Shadow, healing can begin in the most unexpected ways. A kind act, a loyal companion, a quiet moment of grace, or a small whisper from God saying, "You are not alone." If you're watching this, I pray that God places the right people and the right miracles into your life today. May He heal the wounds no one sees, calm the storms in your heart, and guide your steps with His gentle light. And if this story touched you, please share it. Leave a comment and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps these heartwarming stories reach more people who might need a reminder of God's love and kindness. May God bless you, protect your family, and fill your days with His grace. Amen.